Hi, everybody. I am going to read to you chapter 4 of Warriors Don't Cry. So please turn with me in your books to page 33, and let's start reading about Melba's first day at Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. As we walked down the front steps, Mother paused and turned to look back at Grandma, who was standing at the edge of the porch. In their glance, I saw the fear they had never voiced in front of me. Grandma lingered for a moment and then rushed to encircle me in her arms once more. "God is always with you," she whispered as she blinked back tears. Trailing behind Mother, I made my way down the concrete path as she climbed into the driver's seat behind the wheel of our green Pontiac. Mother pressed the gas pedal, and we gained speed. I always watched closely because I wanted my license by my 16th birthday, only 3 months away. I knew the process well by now. She had guided me through practice sessions in the parking lot next to the grocery store often enough. We moved through the streets in silence, listening to the newsman's description of the crowds gathering at Central High. I noticed some of our neighbors, page 34, standing on the sidewalk, many more than were usually out this time of day. "That's strange," Mama mumbled as she waved to people who didn't bother waving back. "No matter, maybe they didn't see me." Our neighbors had always been so friendly, but now they peered at us without their usual smiles. Then I saw Kathy and Rhonda, two of my school friends, standing with their mothers, anxious to catch their attention. I waved out the window with a loud "Hi!" Their disapproving glances matched those of the adults. "I didn't do anything to them," I said, not understanding their reason. "Then you don't have anything to be concerned about." Mother Lois maneuvered through the unusually heavy traffic. "I don't know where all the cars could have come from," she said. We both craned our necks, curious about all the unfamiliar cars and people. Certainly there had never been so many white people driving down the streets of our quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. The voice on the radio grew more urgent as the announcer described the ranks of Arkansas National Guardsmen who ringed Central High School. Hearing the news as we drew near our destination, Mother said, "I think I'll park here. The meeting place is quite a ways away, but from the looks of things, we won't get any closer." The announcer said it was 7:55 as Mama squeezed into a parking space, and we settled ourselves quietly for a moment, trying to identify the buzzing noises that seemed as if it were all around us. It resembled the sounds of crowds at my high school football games. Page 35. But how could that be? The announcer said there was a crowd, but surely it couldn't be that big. Anxious to see the familiar faces of our friends or some of our own people, we hurried up the block lined with wood frame houses and screened-in porches. I strained to see what lay ahead of us. In the distance, large crowds of white people were lining the curb directly across from the front of Central High. As we approached behind them, we could only see the clusters of white people that stretched for a distance of 2 blocks along the entire span of the school building. My mind could take in the sights and sounds only one by one. Flashing cameras, voices shouting in my ears, men and women jostling each other, old people, young people, people running, uniformed police officers walking, men standing still, men and women waving their fists, and then the long line of uniformed soldiers carrying weapons, just like in the war movies I had seen. Everyone's attention seemed riveted on the center of the line of soldiers, where a big commotion was taking place. At first, we couldn't see what they were looking at. People were shouting and pointing, and the noise hurt my ears and muffled the words. We couldn't understand what they were saying. As we drew near, the angry outbursts became even more intense, and we began to hear their words more clearly. "N-word, go home. N-word, go back where you belong." I stood motionless, stunned by the hurtful words. I searched for something to hang on to, something familiar that would comfort me or make sense. But there was nothing. 2, 4, 6, 8, we ain't gonna integrate. Page 36. Over and over the words rang out. The terrifying frenzy of the crowd was building like steam in an erupting volcano. "We have to find the others," Mama yelled in my ear. "We'll be safer with the group." She grabbed my arm to pull me forward out of my trance. The look on her face mirrored the terror I felt. Some of the white men and women standing around us seemed to be observing anxiously. Others, with angry faces and wide open mouths, were screaming their rage. Their words became increasingly vile, fueled by whatever was happening directly in front of the school. The sun beat down on our heads as we made our way through the crowd, searching for our friends. Most people ignored us, jostling each other and craning their necks to see whatever was at the center of the furor. Finally, we got closer to the hub of the activity. Standing on our toes, we stretched as tall as we could to see what everyone was watching. "Oh, my Lord," Mother said. It was my friend Elizabeth they were watching. The anger of that huge crowd was directed toward Elizabeth Eckford as she stood alone in front of Central High, facing the long line of soldiers, with a huge crowd of white people screeching at her back. Barely 5 feet tall, Elizabeth cradled her books in her arms as she desperately searched for the right place to enter. Soldiers in uniforms and helmets, cradling their rifles, towered over her. Slowly she walked first to one and then another opening in their line. Each time she approached, the soldiers closed ranks, shutting her out. As she turned toward us, her eyes hidden by dark glasses, we could see how erect and proud she stood, despite the fear she must have been feeling. Page 37. As Elizabeth walked along the line of guardsmen, they did nothing to protect her from her stalkers. When a crowd of 50 or more closed in like diving vultures, the soldiers stared straight ahead as if posing for a photograph. Once more, Elizabeth stood still, stunned, not knowing what to do. The people surrounded us, shouted, stomped, and whistled as though her awful predicament were a triumph for them. I wanted to help her, but the human wall in front of us would not be moved. We could only wedge through part way. Finally, we realized our efforts were futile. We could only pray as we watched her struggle to survive. People began to applaud and shout, "Get her! Get her! Get the N-word out of here! Hang her!" Not one of those white adults attempted to rescue Elizabeth. The hulking soldiers continued to observe her peril, like spectators enjoying a sport. Under siege, Elizabeth slowly made her way toward the bench at the bus stop. Looking straight ahead as she walked, she did not acknowledge the people, yelping at her heels like mad dogs. Mother and I looked at each other, suddenly conscious that we too were trapped by a violent mob. Ever so slowly, we eased our way backward through the crowd, being careful not to attract attention. But a white man clawed at me, grabbing my sleeve and yelling, "We got us an N-word right here!" Just then another man tugged at his arm, distracting him. Somehow I managed to scramble away. As a commotion began building around us, Mother took my arm and we moved fast, sometimes crouching to avoid attracting more attention. We gained some distance from the center of the crowd and made our way down the block. But when, page 38, I looked back, I saw a man following us, yelling, "They're getting away! Those N-words are getting away!" Pointing to us, he enlisted others to join him. Now we were being chased by 4 men, and their number was growing. We scurried down the sidewalk, bumping into people. Most of the crowd was still preoccupied watching Elizabeth. Panic-stricken, I wanted to shout for help, but I knew it would do no good. Policemen stood by watching Elizabeth being accosted. Why would they help us? "Melba, take these keys," Mother commanded as she tossed them at me. "Get to the car. Leave without me if you have to." I plucked the car keys from the air. "No, Mom, I won't go without you." Suddenly I felt the sting of her hand as it struck the side of my face. She had never slapped me before. "Do what I say!" she shouted. Still, I knew I couldn't leave her there. I reached back to take her arm. Her pace was slowing, and I tried to pull her forward. The men were gaining on us. If we yelled for help or made any fuss, others might join our attackers. Running faster, I felt myself begin to wear out. I didn't have enough breath to keep moving so fast. My knees hurt, my calves were aching, but the car was just around the next corner. The men chasing us were joined by another, carrying a rope. At times our pursuers were so close I could look back and see the anger in their eyes. Mama's pace slowed, and one man came close enough to touch her. He grabbed for her arm, but instead tugged at her blouse. The fabric ripped, and he fell backward. Mama stepped out of her high-heeled shoes, leaving them behind. Her pace quickened in stocking feet. One of the men closest to me swung at me with a large tree branch, but missed. I felt even more panic rise up in my throat. If he hit me hard enough to knock me over, I would be at his mercy. I could hear Grandma India's voice saying, "God is always with you, even when things seem awful." I felt a surge of strength and a new wind. As I turned the corner, our car came into sight. I ran hard, faster than ever before, unlocked the door, and jumped in. Mother was struggling, barely able to keep ahead of her attackers. I could see them turning the corner close on her heels, moving fast toward us. I swung open the passenger door for Mother and revved the engine. Barely waiting for her to shut the door, I shoved the gear shift into reverse and backed down the street with more speed than I'd ever driven before. I slowed to back around the corner. One of the men caught up and pounded his fist on the hood of our car, while another threw a brick at the windshield. Turning left, we gained speed as we drove through a hail of shouts and stones and glaring faces, but I knew I would make it because the car was moving fast and Mama was with me. We sped away from Central High School's neighborhood and into more familiar streets where we should have felt safe. Mother directed me not to drive straight home, but to circle around until we knew for certain that the men from the mob weren't chasing us. Even though I didn't have a license and had only practiced driving in the parking lot, she wouldn't allow me to stop so we could switch places. Her face was drained and her eyes haunted by a kind of fear I had not seen in her before. As I drove, I couldn't help noticing that the streets, page 40, were clogged with cars and people that did not belong in our neighborhood. There were dust-covered trucks full of tobacco-chewing white men, their naked arms and shoulders sporting tattoos. When we pulled into our backyard, Grandmother India was waiting for us with an anxious expression. "Thank God you made it home," she gasped. "What about Elizabeth and the others? Have you heard anything?" "Yes, yes, but let's get inside. Hurry, child, hurry." Grandma India ushered us through the back door. As we entered the house, I saw that she had locked all the doors and windows and pulled all of the shades. As soon as we were safely inside, she piled chairs against the locked back door. "So what about Elizabeth?" I said. "I think she's safe. A white woman and man sat with her on the bus bench, protecting her from those awful people clawing at her. Then they got on the bus with her and rode away, so she's okay." "And the others, Terry and Ernie and those guys. The soldiers turned them away from that school just like they did Elizabeth. They're safe. They didn't catch as much trouble because they were in a large group with Mrs. Bates and some of those ministers. But still, they didn't have no Sunday picnic. They had to get out of there real fast." Even though Mother looked exhausted, nothing would do for her but to get dressed and go to work. "We've got to lead as normal a life as possible," she argued as we described to Grandma what had happened to us. One report said those troops were armed with rifles, nightsticks, and bayonets. "Did you see any of that, Melba?" Yes, ma'am. I think I saw guns." "Maybe things got mixed up. Perhaps the governor had them there to keep peace and they mixed up their orders," Grandma mused. "Seems to me they had ample opportunity to keep peace by protecting Elizabeth." Mother Lois sounded very angry. "I think this situation is different than what we bargained for. We'd better let things cool off a bit. You can go back to Horace Mann for now." Grandma squared her shoulders and said, "I don't see how that will solve anything. Pretty soon white folks will think it's okay to enslave us as it is to use soldiers to keep our kids out of school." Mother stood in silence, pondering Grandma's words for a long moment. Her expression reflected the painful realization that maybe what Grandma said was true. And then suddenly she said, "I had almost forgotten. I have to speak to you, Melba, and I want you to listen closely to every word and obey. Under no circumstances must you ever mention to anyone what happened to us this morning. Even if you have to tell a white lie and say we didn't go to Central, we have to keep this our secret." Telling a white lie was something she'd never before given me permission to do. She swore me to absolute silence, saying above all else those men must not connect us with their ugly deed. If we told the story and they found out who they were chasing, they might come after us to finish the job. As she spoke, her voice quavered and her hands shook. I had never seen her so uncontrolled. She looked the way I felt, battered and weary. Finally, she instructed, "Melba, don't you dare, page 42, go outside, girl. I want to know where you are every moment." She pulled on her jacket, peeked through the glass in the front door, and hurried out onto the porch, almost running around the house to the car. I resigned myself to the fact that Grandma wouldn't allow me to visit Thelma or Minnie Jean or any other friends who lived nearby. I wanted to call them for more news of what happened to them. But before I could pick up the receiver, the phone began to ring off the hook. "Don't you dare answer," Grandma shouted to me from the kitchen. "I think I want to go back to Horace Mann," I told my grandmother. "At least I'll have assignments and friends and all sorts of wonderful first day things to do." "One little setback, and you want out," she said. "No, you're not a quitter." In my diary I wrote, I was disappointed not to see what is inside Central High School. I don't understand why the governor sent grown-up soldiers to keep us out. I don't know if I should go back. But Grandma is right. If I don't go back, they will think they have won. They will think they can use soldiers to frighten us, and we'll always have to obey them. They'll always be in charge if I don't go back to Central and make the integration happen. By late afternoon, the ringing phone, the hot weather, and my confinement were driving me nuts. So when the phone rang, I grabbed for it. "Where were you?" I could hear annoyance in Minnie Jean's voice. "I was there," I said, "across the street. I saw Elizabeth being chased by those ugly people. Why was she alone?" Remember, she doesn't have a phone, so she didn't get that midnight call. She didn't know where or when to meet us. "Mama and I barely made it out of there," I said, being cautious not to tell all. We got out of there as fast as we could. First we went to the superintendent's office. We waited there for an hour, sitting on those hard benches. Then Mrs. Bates dragged us on to the United States Attorney's office to see a Mr. Cobb. Why? She said since Judge Davies made a federal order, we should go there. But Cobb sent us on to the FBI office. That was kind of secret and fun. Those guys look just the way they do on television, like they know something, but they won't tell. Yeah, but what did they do? Asked a lot of questions and wrote the answers down. Questions? Yeah, all about where we stood and who did what to us. Took hours, and I was sweating so bad I thought I would die. Well, are they going to do anything? Investigate. They said they'd investigate. Sure, by that time we could all be dead. You ain't kidding. That mob was outright nasty. I gotta go now, but can you meet me in 15 minutes and we'll go to the community center? The community center, I whispered. It seemed like forever since I'd had an ordinary afternoon there, listening to records and talking to friends who didn't use the word integration. I thought about the wonderful times Minnie Jean and I had shared, times when our greatest concern was saving enough allowance to buy a new record or praying to be asked to walk to the cafeteria with the right boy. Maybe our lives could be that way again. I tiptoed past Grandma, peacefully snoozing in her rocking chair. Suddenly she was awake. "Just where do you think you're going, Missy?" To the community center? I didn't want to disturb you. I thought you were sleeping." "Uh-huh. Have a seat. The best you can do is let up a window, but you ain't going to no community center." I couldn't stop the rush of tears. I ran to my room and fell onto the bed, burying my face in the pillow to hide the sobs that wrenched my insides. All my disappointment over not getting into Central High and the mob chase, as well as the big sudden changes in my life over the past few weeks, came crashing in on me. Then I heard Grandma India padding across the room and felt the weight of her body shift the plane of my mattress as she sat down. "You had a good cry, girl?" Her voice was sympathetic, but also one silver sliver away from being angry. "Yes, ma'am. You'll make this your last cry. You're a warrior on the battlefield for your Lord. God's warriors don't cry, 'cause they trust that He's always by their side. The women of this family don't break down in the face of trouble. We act with courage, and with God's help, we ship trouble right on out." But I tried to explain, but nothing. "Now you get yourself together, read the 23rd Psalm, and don't ever let me see you behave this way again." "Yes, ma'am." The anger in her voice turned my feelings, but her warm hand patted my arm to reassure me of her love. From then on, I knew I could only cry when no one would hear me. The shrill ring of the telephone upset me even more now that I had seen my enemies. I imagined the callers to resemble those men who had chased me. It felt as though they were entering my home each time they called. I could tell Mother felt the same way. With each ring, her expression turned grimmer. "I'll get it." Conrad's voice was less enthusiastic than normal, but still he made his chase for the phone until he was ordered to halt. Grandma had interrupted her cooking to hurry to the phone. She called to me from the hallway. "Sounds like maybe that boy Vince. You know, the polite one from church that we usually see at the wrestling matches?" Grandma beckoned me to take the receiver. Vince, I thought to myself as my heart leapt with joy. Sure, I know very well who Vince was. He attended high school in a neighboring town, but he was in my Sunday school class. It was Grandma who didn't really know that Vince was my secret pretend dreamboat boyfriend. I wasn't at all certain he knew it. He was at least 2 years older than me and drove a new Chevy and looked sort of like caramel-colored James Darren. "Make this conversation brief, honey," Grandma said as she handed me the phone. "Hello?" I said, using the sexy whisper dictated by romance magazines. "Melba?" It wasn't Vince. It wasn't Vince's voice saying my name. "Yes," I answered. in a polite tone, dropping my pretense. The voice wasn't at all familiar to me. "Melba N-word, I know where you live. 12th and Cross. We gonna get you tonight. Long about midnight." I heard the receiver click and he was gone. Did he know where my bedroom was? Would he come over now? Did he have a bomb? I couldn't tell Mom and the others that he knew so much about us, so I choked back my tears. As I entered the living room, faces turned my way in anticipation. I pretended a smile and said it was somebody else, another friend, not Vince. I thought it was a sign that we were feeling more confident when we turned the television set off in the middle of the uproar about Central and took our places at the dinner table. After the blessing, the topic turned to what was really on our minds. "I'll keep watch again tonight," Grandma said. Mother studied her plate for a long moment before she looked up at Grandma. "Maybe you could get some sleep tonight and I could stand guard." "That would be a real good idea, except you don't know how to shoot a gun. This is no time for on-the-job training." Grandma was an expert marksman. As a railroad man, Grandpa had spent lots of time away from home. He had insisted Grandma learn to use a gun to protect herself because they had lived in an isolated area in the early years of their marriage. "God does not forgive those who kill others," Grandma said. Expert marksmanship is a must because you always got to aim for fingers or toes, and them's small targets. That's the reading of chapter 4.